Hello, everybody, and welcome to Another Theater Company's Disabled in Theater panel. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists here today. First of all, we have Ann Post Fife. Ann, do you want to share your pronouns and everything?
Yeah, sure thing. My name is Ann Post Fife, and I use she, her pronouns. Do you want me to say anything more about me?
Sure, if you want to.
Okay. So you can see clearly that I'm signing over here. I identify as deaf with a capital D. So I identify as a deaf person. I have been using ASL since high school, and I'm doing theater since high school, and I am currently a student at UVU studying, hopefully to get my bachelor's degree in theater arts education. I want to teach theater. That's what I'm studying to become. So that's where I am at this moment.
Awesome. Thank you, Ann. Thanks for being here. And I will also just introduce Jordan as our interpreter. Awesome. Thank you, Jordan. Next up, we have Drew Anderson. Drew, if you want to turn on your video and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hey, I'm Drew Anderson, and I use he, him pronouns. And I identify as disabled because I was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune and neurological disorder. I currently teach theater and performing arts to preschoolers, and my goal would be to get back to teaching the high schoolers that I like to teach as well. So
Awesome. Love it. Thank you, Drew. Next up, we have Liz Joyner.
Hi, Liz Joyner. My pronouns are she, her. I identify as disabled because I am neurodivergent and mentally ill. And I am the production manager for another theater company. And I'm also a director. Currently without a project, but that'll happen again someday.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. We've got Melissa up next.
Hello. My name is Melissa Salguero. I am a physically disabled woman. I use she, her pronouns. Yeah, I use a motorized chair, and I also teach high schoolers, currently not since the pandemic, but mostly I either act or teach.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thanks. Nice to have you, Melissa. And then last we have Sage Nielsen.
Hi, I'm Sage. I mostly have done technical work in theater. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm physically disabled as well. I have multiple chronic illnesses as well as PTSD. So that's sort of how I exist in the context of disability. So yeah.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here, Sage. And to introduce myself, I'm Ash. I am also a company member with AOTC, and I use they, them pronouns. And same as Liz, I'm kind of in the neurodivergent mental illness realm of disability. So just to get started, we wanted to address the term disabled that we're using kind of as an umbrella term. You can see that we have a lot of different communities here. And some of them have things in common. Some of them are their own kind of separate communities. And we are kind of using the social model of disability in that we're reclaiming this term that has been used to kind of define us in terms of our ability to produce under capitalism, basically, and then using that term to come together and unite for disability justice. So that being said, it's everyone's personal choice option if they want to identify with that term or not. But yeah, here we are, disability panel. So we're just going to go through a couple questions that we've given to our panelists today. And for panelists, if you would like to raise your hands virtually, then I will just go ahead and call on you one by one so we don't have too many people on the screen. So first up, when have you experienced ableism or discrimination as an artist, either yourself or directed towards a peer? How was the situation handled, and what do you wish had happened? Melissa, thank you.
Perfect. So I mean, I feel like, at least in my experience, a lot of what I see as a common occurrence is in the casting rooms. So there's a lot of inappropriate questions that happen between either the casting directors or just other people in the room. Inability to access venues, or immediately being infantilized upon entering the room. And it's kind of difficult in those situations because you are there auditioning, but you don't really want to correct, or you don't really know. For example, I was auditioning for a musical for a local theater company. And because I am a power wheelchair user, because it's a musical, I like to contact the stage manager or the choreographer to just let them know, so that the venue that they're in, I can make sure I know, like, oh, do I need to make any accommodations and how to do the thing properly. But they didn't have a contact person. So I had to reach out to the director themselves, and have that awkward conversation of, hey, you don't know me at all, but I need to know whether or not your venue is accessible. And so it kind of outs you in a weird way because you're not having a conversation with the proper channels on how to make those accommodations. So for me personally, I would have wished that the information for accommodations was clearer and more accessible, because it, for example, in general questions like, oh, where is the venue going to be? What entrance should I use? I think is something that does not only apply to someone who has a disability, but just generally, you know?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Melissa. And like, I definitely feel like it should not be on you to be the one determining that everything's accessible. Like, that should be already accounted for. But yeah, thank you for sharing. Anne, yes.
So I had a similar experience as Melissa had. I was auditioning and I had to set up for an interpreter, and I had to contact them to see if they would provide an ASL interpreter. I mean, a few years ago, that was just, I had a really lousy experience. It was just, there was a severe lack of awareness for dealing with interpreters in that. And I've gone out there and I've met lots of people, and I've let them know, not just deaf people, but the disabled community in general has specific special needs. And for myself, I've had a lot of positive and negative experiences. There's been a lot of pros and cons. And I've had to figure out for myself how to fit into the theater community and how to work with directors. And I've had a lot of roadblocks. I've had a lot of people that won't provide interpreters, that won't even see me, that aren't, I haven't had a lot of that support, people who support the deaf community or support the disabled community in general. So if I don't get provided an interpreter, I'm stuck. I especially for Utah, the state here, there's not very much awareness of deaf in theater. In California and in New York, they already have just established communities with the deaf community in theater. And so if I were to go to see a Broadway play, they have like some sort of captioning system that you can watch theater from, like that's readily available. And that's happening right now. But here, or when I go to another state where that's not an established community, everywhere else, there's just there's a lot of pros and cons with my deafness as far as that goes. And I actually do face like I'll be like, I need to sit in the front so I can see it. And they're like, why do you need to sit in the front? And so I have to, if I'm in the back of the production of the theater, I can't see what's going on. I can't read or see the interpreters, or so there's a lot of lack of resources, as well as that lack of awareness that goes on with being a deaf person involved in the theater community.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. And thanks for sharing that. It's good to hear that in some places it's starting to get better. So hopefully we can continue to make that happen here.
Yes.
Awesome. I see Sage. Go ahead, Sage.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sage. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sorry about that.
You're good.
I like Melissa and Anne were both saying, if your point of contact for accessibility is like a casting director, that's going to put you at a disadvantage from the start, because you're already being seen as like someone other. Like I think it's a conflict of interest when you don't have contact. Personally, with like inaccessibility, I haven't had as much discrimination that's direct, but a lot of backstage areas are often only accessible through multiple flights of stairs or even like ladders. So that seems like a concern to me. But...
Oh yeah, that's a big problem. Awesome. Thank you, Sage. We got Liz next.
Sorry, it took me a second there. Yeah, what Sage just said just reminded me of like, I was at a theater that was being remodeled, and I remember noticing that the booth, there was like no way that you could get to it except for through this very windy path with tons of stairs. And I mentioned to someone, well, what if someone with like mobility issues wanted to run the light board? And the person I talked to was like, oh, well, I guess they can't. And I was like, okay, that's not an issue in your mind?
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and so it's just, people don't seem to have the right mindset in a lot of cases. In regards to me and like me personally experiencing ableism, most of the things theater related that I have experienced have been like needing accommodation and for just like a small instance, and people being like, well, why would you need that? Why can't you just, you know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get over it like everyone else does? And then it becomes this matter of like, do I like pull out the medical paperwork or, and I actually, when I was in school, had issues. I've been to 3 different colleges, and I won't say which college this was, but in speaking with the accommodations office, I brought in all my paperwork and was like, hey, here's the accommodations I need. And the person that was working with me was like, well, we can't give you these accommodations. And I'm glad that I had previously been to another college where I had those accommodations, because I was like, why? And was able to kind of fight it and eventually got what I needed. But it just made me sad, because I was like, what if I had been like this young freshman that didn't know any better? I probably would have been like, oh, okay, and just slunk away, you know? And I feel like theater is so intertwined with academia that like issues at colleges very much affect issues within theater.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it takes a lot. I always say accessibility isn't always the most accessible because I feel like it takes a lot, either like energy, personal energy, or sorry, my dog chose her loudest toy to bring in here. um, but it takes a lot of energy. It often takes a lot of resources of time or money to even have access to accessibility. So yeah, that's a huge thing that we need to remember in theater, knowing that disabled folks don't often have the resources they need to advocate for themselves, which is why we need to be aware so we can make things accessible. Awesome. And I see Drew was next, and then we've got Melissa.
Hey, so I think what I can bring that is sort of interesting to this story is that my disability is fairly recent. It's within the last 3 or so years. I was actually injured while in a production, and I was auditioning for another production at the time. So on the note of positive, I was still cast in a show when they knew I just had surgery. I was on a peg leg at one point because I didn't walk for another 4 months after my surgery. And so that was really, just a neat moment to feel like I could still be included. As I left and tried to do things in places that I wasn't as known or wasn't as, I guess what I was capable of wasn't as known. And farther down the line, as my condition continues to deteriorate, I'm beginning to see more of the, like Liz was saying, I have had to pull myself up the stairs to do a light board. There's not a whole lot of accessibility that perhaps isn't thought of very often, but I found myself right in the middle of having to think about it. And I guess what I'm appreciative of this moment is just to be able to kind of raise that awareness, because it definitely needs to be addressed. There's a lot that could be improved upon in the community, I'll say. So, yeah.
Thanks so much, Drew. Yes, definitely. And then Melissa, did you still have something?
Yes.
Awesome.
So this was fairly recently, but I think that echoing what Ann Post Fife was saying, a lot of the time you have to be not only your own resource in theater, but you have to be your own advocate and learn how to have those conversations as well. So for example, I was a part of a show that toured at another venue. And I had to, make sure that, oh, is this venue going to be accessible? And by accessible, I mean, are there stairs? Are there this? And I had worked with the stage manager before. And so they were like, yeah, okay, I will make sure I will reach out to the venue, see what's going on. And we got the answer of, yes, this is accessible. However, when I went there, it was not. There was an entire flight of stairs. And in addition to that, they had a different set on stage, which we've worked with. It's normally not a problem, but there was a 2-foot raise from the floor. So my wheelchair actually couldn't get up the stairs from the dressing rooms, which was the accessible level, to the stage. But even if we could get it there, I couldn't actually get the chair on stage. So we came up with the quick solution of I'm just going to sit in a chair and sit on stage, but it literally was me or my mobility aid and the negotiation that I had to make as an artist and as a person too, and being like, oh, am I okay with this? And if not, can I really stop a show right now because we've got 30 people already in and we're not even, started. So like there is a lot of, I think, accessibility kind of echoing, people don't really understand what that means. And so even if you spell it out, sometimes they aren't thinking like, for example, I don't really think that they thought that the lip of the stage was something that they had to consider when I said this is the clearance for the wheelchair. They just said, oh, well, there's a step in the front, so maybe the back. So like you really have to spell it out. And I think that it does come down to resources, knowledge, all of that, because accessibility is not always easy, but it's needed. And so I think it's also negotiating that fine line of how do we make things accessible, but still float as a company, because I know, especially in Utah, we have a lot of companies that we're not union. We don't have the same funding or our community, which is great, but in the same breath, what is the point of having 50 companies if it will only serve like this part of the population or this part of the community? Especially because I think there's this connotation that disabled and deaf artists and educators, we aren't the majority, which is completely wrong. We make up a huge part of the talent pool and the people working in the industry, both as educators, technicians, directors, but it's the fact that it's been this way for so long that we don't really think about, is this an issue? Or, oh, but if, it's the metaphor of, well, the door's cracked. And it's like, yes, but if the door's open to everyone else, and if I can't get to the door, then it's not accessible. So that's my comment.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Melissa. Yeah, thanks everybody for sharing. Drew, do you have one more thing before we go on to our next?
Nope, I just forgot. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. No worries. Awesome. Sounds great. So our next question is, what microaggressions of ableism have you seen perpetuated? What misconceptions or stereotypes are common in the theater world? Awesome. We'll do Anne and then Liz.
So for me as a deaf person, for the theater community, it really, all of us have our own skills and abilities, and something that we have to showcase, but it's, this is what I am. This is what you got. I'm a deaf person. I can do these things. You can use me for these things. It's not just, I am a deaf person to be used as a deaf character, or as a deaf, I'm not just a deaf person. I have, it's not about, there's a lack of awareness. There's a lack of resources. Like Melissa was saying, oh, because, we're not the majority, we're a minority, but we shouldn't be passed over or ignored because of that. It's hard to, step out of your comfort zone enough to advocate for yourself and say, hey, these are the things I can do. You run into a lot of, it can be frustrating. I have had opportunities to be in plays. It's been successful. They've, required some working around, but that's worked. And in the theater world, it's just really interesting to observe that realm, and both to live in it, or both live theater and on a TV screen. They're very different worlds. And it shouldn't be a place where they can pass us by or sweep us under the rug, or, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Anne. Liz and then Melissa.
So in trying to think about things that aren't like overtly ableist, but still are ableist, the first thing that came to mind for me was the fact that theater is so intertwined with academia, because like, for instance, I asked a producer that I've worked with many times before, like, what would I need to do to direct for you in the future? Like, what stepping stones can I work on to direct for you in the future, expecting him to say, oh, go get more directing experience, or, maybe we'll find you assistant directing opportunities, something like that. And he was like, well, when are you getting your degree? And for me, that was like heartbreaking, because I had been in college for 13 years at that point. And I finally decided to drop out. And I think that some people don't think about how higher education has barriers for a lot of people. And yeah, I guess that's my big one.
Yes, definitely that shouldn't be the thing that opens the door if that's not accessible to a lot of us for a lot of reasons, right? Not just disability, but like socioeconomic, time, any kind of resources. So yes, thanks so much, Liz, for bringing that up. And I believe Sage was next.
Yeah. So I think that I wouldn't call this a microaggression, it's more of a direct aggression, but I think consistently able-bodied or non-disabled actors are cast in disabled roles, and often those roles are written by non-disabled people, which is a huge problem. That's like one of two. The other issue I see is that disabled actors aren't cast in the rest of the roles. Like, there's this reduction of the person to their disability, that you're not really seen as an actor, you're seen as a disabled person who happens to act and therefore can only like fulfill that role. And that's like a huge problem. And I think the other thing, and this affects me more, is there's this idea that if you are working as a stagehand or a technician, then you must not be disabled. Like, I've had stage managers who expect everyone to perform a role that isn't like actually in their job description, to like perform a physically exerting task. I've like expressed to stage managers that I physically can't do something, and had them say to me, oh, well, how about you wait for 10 minutes and see how you feel then? And I'm like, if I tell you I can't do something, that means I can't do it. And people perceive it as something that's negotiable when like access needs aren't negotiable. So
Yes, absolutely. Completely agree. Thank you, Sage. We've got Melissa next and then Drew.
Definitely see that a lot, Sage. As far as I see a lot of my friends who do have like chronic illnesses or other access needs, expect to be like, oh, if you are working as, especially in the technical realm, like if you're in this field, you have to be superhuman. Like you have to, on one leg, lift up 40 pounds with one hand and completely like, yeah. So I've seen that a lot, but another thing too is that the portrayal of disability in a lot of the shows, or just media in general. So you always have like disability being this overt metaphor for like a physical flaw, like a grotesque kind of thing. So they're always the villain, always the bad guy. Or you have the complete opposite 180 of that, which is like, oh, we're so helpless and timid. Oh, we're disabled. How dare us, society? And it's like, no, we can exist in an in-between. Like, we're human, so we have redeeming qualities and flaws. It's what makes everything interesting. Like, but it always comes down to the disability. And so there's not like there are not a lot of roles that are written for disabled individuals, especially disabled roles that are written by disabled individuals. And so when we can't even fill those roles, because like I've had experiences where I've seen people, they're like, oh, okay, we want a deaf actress for this. And they're like, all right, awesome, opportunity, refer my friends. And they're like, oh, okay, we decided to cast this hearing person instead. But the deaf person can come on as an advisor or something like that. And it's like, okay, you're robbing an opportunity. But even worse than that, it is like regular roles, because a lot of assumptions are, unless the casting description specifically states this role is open, they're going to think white person who is able-bodied and cis, and that's just how it's going to be. Which I think that other theaters, and I will give Utah a little bit of credit, we're kind of trying to break the mold, and we've had some successes with, I've seen it in a lot of theater companies, but it's still bridging that gap a little bit, because I think that we think of diversity and access and equity in this term of like, we get fixed on one thing. So we're like, oh, okay, so this year we're only going to focus on women, or this year we're only going to focus on like this or that. And it's like, no, we can have well-rounded experiences. We just need to, I don't know, make things like exemplify our diversity statements, maybe.
Absolutely, and get more of the intersections of identity going in there, because everyone is so much more complex than just this one facet of their being. And I love that you mentioned that it goes all the way back to the writing, right? The writing, the producing, casting. We've talked about the tech, even in and like being in the audience. So like literally this affects every stage of theater. So we definitely have to. Yes, and Drew is next.
Okay, so when I was looking over this question, the way that I like kept really thinking about it was like we've all kind of said, there's a conception from the beginning of what characters look like, sound like, walk like, talk like, everything. Already as a 5'3" guy in theater, like we know that you're looked at differently already just for something like that. But now I also have twitches and stutter and things like that, which, you know, just add to that. But talking about like the microaggressions, like anytime, and this is before my injury, anytime I've ever been partnered with somebody in a dance or whatever, there's that immediate flinch away. What am I supposed to do? Okay, you don't look capable, basically, of doing what I am supposed to be doing with you. I have seen that over and over and over again, even just like I said, being a 5'3" dancer. If I get paired with a girl who in her character shoes is now 6'2", there's concern, you know. But without fail, we've made it happen, you know. I just think what I see from that, with all of the little flinches and all the things like that, is there's just not enough discussion about what people are purely capable of doing. You know, it needs to be your reputation, not the appearance on the outside, or their conception of the appearance on the outside. Is kind of what I was thinking about on that.
Love it. Yes, a lot of unfounded biases that just go totally unquestioned and like assumed that everyone else shares. And like, I love that you brought that up. That is also something that's really important. So changing the conversation just a little bit, we are gonna see if anyone has experienced any proactively accessible theater, positive representation of disabled folks. So what did that look like? How did that make you feel? Um, is it possible? Have you had that happen in your life before? We got Melissa first and then Drew.
Yeah, this one was both in college and from a choreographer, so it was like the double take of like, oh, okay. I was cast in a musical in my undergrad, and I was super excited about it, but I was hesitant. Not because I don't have experience with musicals, but because when you're trying to do choreography in a wheelchair, a lot of choreographers are like, oh, okay, we're gonna have you sit this out. Or something along those lines. And so they get very like shocked when they're like, oh wait, you have rhythm? And it's like, yes.
Yes.
But the choreographer approached me after I was cast and said, hey, what, like, I want to have an honest conversation about what you feel your strengths are. Like, what can you, like, we had an honest discussion of like, how can you use your wheelchair? Like, what does spinning look like for you? Are you comfortable with people touching your mobility aid? Like, can they do this on it? And it became this open conversation. And what I liked was we had that beforehand, just me and the choreographer, but that conversation was also brought in to the rehearsals. So when we had specific like group scenes or anything, it was like, okay, these are like, we're going to have this duet thing. So why don't you do this? Melissa, are you comfortable with this? And I could say, no, but this is a better idea instead. And so the choreographer kind of let me lead the conversation and say, okay, like, no, you can't suddenly drape yourself on my wheelchair. But you know what? Jump on the back. Like, let's do this or something like that. And so it was nice because we had already cleared that up beforehand too. So it felt a little like the choreographer did not need to ask me these questions again, but they did, knowing that I was comfortable with it. But also so that going forward, I know that like it bred this culture of, oh, okay, if we're going to be doing this scene together, is this comfortable for you? Can I touch X? Like, what are the parts of your body that like, and so we've done that, and that was an amazing experience, especially because the choreographer is the one who initiated it. And so that was awesome. And so I love that that's a cultural shift that's happening.
Yes, I love that. I love this discussion of boundaries and consent. Like, just taking that same idea that we've already become or starting to get more acquainted with and just extending that to people with mobility aids and people with other disabilities, making sure that everybody's comfy and like a willing participant in whatever you have going on. That's great. We've got Drew next.
I'll be quick because I'm sure that somebody has more. Anyway, so my uncle is actually deaf and has never come to a theater production because he just never saw a need to. It didn't interest him. He wasn't sure how he could enjoy it. And I actually was a part of a production that started talking about having an ASL night, and we invited him and got excited about that. And as they were pulling everything together, it just got too overwhelming. They couldn't get, anyone interested in interpreting an entire show of a cast of all these people. And it just fell apart. So he still came to the show. He was able to enjoy it because the stage was so close to the audience, kind of like Anne was saying before. But it really opened my mind. I think that exact moment was when I realized that there was an entire, group of people being completely excluded from theater at that point. So it makes me feel better to see productions taking steps. There have been a couple of ASL productions throughout Utah here and there. But yeah, like Anne was saying, there definitely is some growth that can be happening there. But
Awesome. Yes, love it. Any other positive experiences? Ooh, Sage. Oh, yes, and then N.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I honestly haven't experienced proactively accessible theater. Like the most I've seen has been like having a night or two that is specifically for autistic audiences, or having a night or two where there is an ASL interpreter, but I've never personally, like, I know it exists, but I've never personally encountered a production that is like intentionally accessible. I know there are disabled artists out there doing things like that, but it's rarely an entire theater company, and it's rarely like proactive. So.
Yes, definitely. That's super valid. I mean, that needs to be said. Yes. Anne, go ahead.
Um, I, I totally agree with what's been said. For myself, as a theater patron, my children have been involved in it too, and I've had several positive experiences. And I've been cast in shows, and I've been asked, are you okay with this? Is it was an ensemble role. It wasn't a main role, but they were asked. I was asked specifically, like, how I can contribute to the story, and it was a process. But I knew, and I knew it would happen. But whether it's the wheelchair choreography, working one-on-one with them, like with me, I can use my sign as part of the choreography. And so it was made sure that I would be visible, not just hidden in the background, that I would be a focal point even. And yes, so I agree with, like having special nights for autistic people, or children with autism, or the deaf community. It needs to be more than that. It's great to have specific nights, but some people can't make it to those nights, and that's not fair. So we need to have those accommodations on more than just a one-night basis. It's so right now it's tough, but in the past it's been tougher. We've gotten better. We aren't there yet, but we're making progress, and that's along lots of different lines. So
Awesome. I love that. I love that you brought up using your signs in choreography, and like just shifting the conception of accessibility from something that is a burden, or is going to cost more money, or not be as good as for the rest of the audience, to this conception of like it's an enrichment, it's like an embrace of diversity, and makes it a better experience for everyone involved, and not just for this specific part of the population. I love that. I did love being I loved getting to do the Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime at AOTC, and doing, I think it is the only night that we had for autistic audiences specifically. So we definitely need to get better at that. But it was really good to get to like work with the director and the rest of the cast and figure out what is going to be like too overwhelming for autistic audiences, or like at one point it's a weird show to have autistic audiences come to, because it's like so specifically about this autistic character who goes through all of these things that are really triggering for his autism. So like he goes through a train station and there's so much overstimulation of noise and overlapping noises and bright lights and everything. It's like, how are we going to convey this to somebody who has sensory stimulation issues? And me being there, like, you can like take the volume down all you want, but if they have overlapping noises, it's still getting my heart racing. We still have to like slow this all the way down, and it's still going to get the message across, but it's going to be in a way that's not completely alienating to the audience that the story is meant to be about. So that's awesome. I love it. I hope we can do some more productions like that we're being aware of who we're inviting into our space just by the very fact of the way that we do our performances. Sage, your hand is up. Is that still up, or did you have another thing you want to say?
Yeah, I had one other thing, which is somewhat related. I think that it's rarely do lighting designers take into consideration autistic audiences, people with epilepsy, and people with PTSD. Frequently, there's, very loud sounds and like the imitation of explosions, for instance, or lasers or flashing lights. And often in those productions, the theaters will fail to communicate that those things are in the production to their audiences, both online and in the box offices, and having postings. And that's a pretty big issue from my point of view. But
I love that. I'm like taking notes. I'm like, how can we make AOTC better at doing all of these things? But I totally agree. Like, I shouldn't have to go in expecting that I'm just gonna have to dissociate to even like be in the theater. I should definitely have the option to be there and be fully present without feeling like I'm gonna be overstimulated or triggered at some point. I just want to make sure real quick before I move on, is there anybody else who wanted to add any proactive, positive experiences that they've had? Awesome. Let's go ahead and go on to the next one. And this is, what changes do you think need to be made to make theater more accessible and welcoming to people with disabilities? So we've talked about a lot, but there can always be more. Let's hear them. Yes, Liz.
So the thing that comes to mind first for me is stories that actually center the perspective of disabled people, rather than having it be, like they're the side character who motivates the main character. Or I remember seeing a production that talked about mental health issues, but it was very much in a way that was like, let us explain what having mental illness is like to all you people who don't have it. And watching it, I was like, ugh, I hate this. And not that that's like a bad thing for that to exist, but I just felt like there was none of me in there. Like, they clearly had not talked to people who actually experienced it and like actually centered that lived experience. It felt very like we researched what psychologists have to say about it and wrote this play,
Yeah, absolutely. It goes all the way back to the writing. And I think the more that we involve people with disabilities in like every aspect of theater, the more people with disabilities are going to feel like they have the opportunity, that they'll even be listened to if they do write about their experiences. Because I totally agree. Like, I feel like everything is especially around like autism and mental illness. It's like, this is the struggles that this person's family has to go to because this person is different and has all of these challenges, and that's really hard for their families and the people around them. Yeah, go ahead, Liz.
Sorry, I just wanted to add on to the end of that. I feel like when perspectives aren't centered, it feels like asking Ken Burns about what a veteran's experience is like. It's like, yeah, he has tons of information on it, but like, he's not the guy you should be talking to.
Yes, 100%. Awesome. We've got Drew and then Anne.
What I would really just say is like these conversations need to be happening. There's definitely a stigma to disabilities in theater. You know, I myself am fortunate enough that at times I can hide. And I've had it requested that I do hide because otherwise I won't work. And that's not what should be happening. What should be happening is that if you have a concern about my ability or what I can or cannot do, let's have that conversation. Let's talk about it. And that sort of thing. And I think that's just kind of what I'm hearing echoed from everyone here is let's have these conversations and have it out in the open so that we can figure out where the problems are.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, I think, for the social aspect of theater, like being there in the room where these conversations are happening. Like you said, you were asked to hide, and like Melissa said, she was asked to not even enter the dressing room. Like the dressing rooms are just as much as important an aspect of theater as being on the stages. So I'm very glad you brought that up. That's awesome. Go ahead, Anne.
Each of us know how much our involvement with theater has improved. But as a deaf person, I know that I love a lot. I've done a lot of I love a lot of plays and a lot of scenes that that aren't making exceptions, but have examples of like shadow interpreters, people following the characters on stage. And it depends on who's in charge. It depends on their team, the people that they're working with, those that are close to them. So having any disabled people in that circle subtracts from those problems. And for example, I love I love the character of Lady Macbeth from the Shakespeare play, and there, you know, I can, with no signing, with her just talking, I know the character well enough that I can understand what's going on. And it would be awesome if everything was completely open and accessible, but it's not happening right now. We have to advocate for that ourselves. And we have to let people know that. We have to tell them, we have to tell them to think of us, to consider us as theater for us. And for example, I don't always need an interpreter with me while I'm on stage working. And to include more of the audience members, because you know, it's great to have an interpreter in the audience for deaf people, but just knowing to have an area where you can have deaf people a space where they can see better, where they can where the lighting is accessible for them. Just not just people on stage, but people in the audience to teach, to say, hey, we're here. We're not hiding you guys. You know, to see that that's being provided to us is a really important thing. And it sends a message to us and to others.
Yes, I love that. I really hope that anybody watching this feels a little bit more prepared to go out and advocate in their own settings after being a part of this conversation. I just hope that people feel a little bit more empowered to start having these conversations, so it doesn't always fall on the people that they're affecting the most. That's awesome. Let's go ahead and have Melissa go next.
Yeah, I think just echoing what Anne said is making that shift and actually employing disabled individuals. Like, if we're in the room, things are going to change. And that's, yes, on stage, both as actors, but also as technicians, as casting directors. Like, we start to have these conversations and we start to have these productive conversations once we're there, because you can't ignore us anymore. But also because once we are able to have those conversations and point out what is not accessible, it makes it more accessible for audience members. And that's the goal, isn't it? Is just making theater accessible for everyone. So.
Yes, exactly. Some fuck you, pay me vibes. I talked a little bit about earlier, like that disabled is just this term that is used to describe how profitable we are to corporations or capitalism in general. And that maybe society's view of us, but that absolutely does not mean that it's true, that our work and our voice and our capabilities are extremely valuable to society in general, and to theater, and to these stories that we have to tell. It's awesome. Right, I'm not seeing any more hands. Is there anybody else that has something they wanted to share before we move on to our final question? Sage.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate what I was saying earlier, which is the importance of like representative casting. And I think not just casting disabled people in disabled roles, which is very important, but also casting disabled people in all of your casts. Like, that should be normal and acceptable. And the thing is, I think a lot of times disabled people may not necessarily audition. And I think that in order to combat that, you have to have more outreach. And you also have to put effort into making your venues more accessible. And if they're not accessible, then providing accommodations. So that's all I wanted to add.
Yes, love it. Thank you so much. Awesome. All right. Definitely let me know if there are any last minute things that you think that we could be doing to help theater be a better experience for anybody under our lovely disabled community umbrella here. But lastly, I'm going to ask everybody if you have any resources like books, social media accounts, movies that you would suggest people to check out to learn more about these issues. I'll go ahead and start. I didn't give this a whole lot of thought, but I've definitely appreciated the work of Neurodivergent Rebel on Instagram and Actually Autistic. They're great, wonderful wonderful accounts to follow to get a little bit more perspective from people who are actually neurodivergent and not, and not charities that like don't even have neurodivergent people on their boards or anything. So that's mine. Did anyone else think of anything, have something they want to share? Yes, Melissa.
All right, so you can tell that I was like an overachiever in high school because I have a list.
Love it.
So the first that I have is Cryptiques. So it's like critique, but with the word crip instead. And that's by Caitlin Wood. It's a free PDF online magazine, but you can buy it online, and I would if I were you. And basically, it's a collection of essays by disabled authors talking about just everything relating to disability culture and justice. So exploring themes of gender, culture, identity, ableism, and it's firsthand essays and stories. Another one that's similar to that is called Skin, Tooth, and Bones. And that one, same thing, but it offers more context for the disability justice movement and other things like what the conversations are being had now as far as what disability and capitalism looks like. Another thing, obviously, is Disability Visibility by Alice Wong, which if you haven't read it, oh my gosh, please. Especially, and I would recommend the next couple for people who don't really have a basis of, okay, what are these conversations looking like, especially in the media, as someone who's producing or working in theater or the media. It's just another collection of essays and by a disability justice advocate. The next one is if you're your college professors, and I'm going to add the disclaimer that this one's a little outdated, but they have a textbook for you, which is called Disability and Theater, a practical manual for inclusion in the arts. And so it's a textbook, it's gonna have its benefits, it's gonna have its downsides, and is like nodding. But I know that's a thing. And then for social, you can watch Crip Camp on Netflix and get a whole rundown on the disability rights movement. You can also look at Sitting Pretty, The View from My Ordinary Resilient Disabled Body by Rebecca Tossig, or The Pretty One by Kaya Brown. And both of these are memoirs, basically, from these disabled women who talk about the portrayal of themselves in media. And Kaya Brown actually is a Black femme who has cerebral palsy and works in, she does live theater, but mostly she does television work. And so she has firsthand knowledge and just experience of this is what we go through. So if you're like, oh, okay, how do I start to make things accessible, or what are some of the more nuanced things that happen, those are great.
Awesome. Oh, I love it. Thank you for your list, Melissa. I'll make sure that we get everything listed out in the captions for this and in the video description. I really wish that we had more time to go into disability justice, because that is a huge thing when we talk about resource equality, when we talk about marriage equality, when we talk about any sort of disability justice. We have a ton of work to do. That's a conversation we can definitely have at another time, but awesome. Let's do Anne and then Sage.
Okay, so for resources, I've been thinking, I know that I could like Google search a ton of stuff, but like specifically with deaf resources that don't have other people profiting over us, that's going to be hard. But like Deaf West Theater and the National Theater for the Deaf in New York, and those are two. But so I like that program. the national endowment for the arts, they have, I mean, it's for everyone, but they have a specific program for disabilities, and they have a lot specifically for deafness, for helping deaf artists in the theater. That's a really good one. I like that a lot. I've used those before. It helps a lot. So specifically for deaf people, that's a great resource. Just make sure if you find a resource that is specifically related to deaf audiences, make sure that it's from deaf individuals. Interpreters are good too. I would recommend getting a deaf person involved as an advocate or somebody to support. We do need interpreters for communication. That's the thing that we can't, that's the only thing that we can't do for ourselves. So those are some resources I would recommend.
Awesome. Thanks, Anne. Sage and then Liz.
Yeah, I'll just mention a couple people that I follow on Instagram. One of them is Imani Barbarin. Her tag is Crutches and Spice. It's on Instagram and Twitter. I believe she's actually an actress, and she talks a lot about disability representation and the Oscars and how misrepresentative they are. I really like Mia Mingus, who talks about disability justice a lot. And she has a lot of resources as well on Instagram. And I also follow Ruby Allegra, and she is an artist. She's not in theater specifically, but she addresses a lot of the same things. So those are some people I would check out.
Yes, love it. Alrighty, Liz.
So the first one that came to mind for me was Teach on TikTok. I don't know if anyone has TikTok, but it's AUTEACH, Teach. And then on Instagram, Project Let's, LETS, is a great one. And then my last one is Acute Psychotic. It's like a play on acute psychosis. It's acute psychotic. So those are my three.
Cute. Love it. Awesome. Drew, did you have any, or did we miss anybody else?
Didn't have like a specific resource or anything. I would just say, like, as far as being an advocate goes, like, anybody who's now seen this or anyone who knows someone in the community who's going through any of this stuff, like, promote them, help them, be their advocate, be their support. You know, if you've got questions, if you know someone has questions, go directly to the person. Everybody's situation is so individual. That would be what I would hope can change, is that there's just more open dialogue about all of it. So
Awesome. Beautiful, beautiful voices, everyone. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your stories with us. I really appreciate you coming together tonight to share this with our community. So yes, I think last things last, if everyone would just go ahead and turn their cameras on so we can see all your lovely faces at once. Awesome. Beautiful. Thanks so much for being here, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.